In Showtime's limited series, The Loudest Voice, Sienna Miller plays Elizabeth Ailes, the wife of the late Fox News chairman Roger Ailes, who was forced to resign amid the scandal of multiple allegations of sexual harassment and abuse. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Gold TV, and Sienna, I'm literally watching this show with no prior knowledge, and I'm wondering, oh wow, who is this lady? Who's this American actress playing this long-suffering life? She's plump and she's old, and I've never heard of her. And then after a while, I'm like, oh, that's Sienna Miller. Do you hear that a lot?
I really did with this one. I mean, I want to kind of disappear in everything I do. This was aided by some pretty genius prosthetics. And I think that was part of the appeal, was to play someone who was really vastly different from myself or anyone that I played before. But I had many friends who had absolutely no idea, which was great.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's the ultimate compliment that you disappear into a role. Were you excited about doing something completely different to anything you've done before, where you just can become a different person?
You know, I always am. That's what I'm always looking for, is something that's a real departure. And this was, she was so far away from me in every single way. Politically, couldn't be further away from where I stand. But I think that's the challenge, is what is it like to sit in that space? What is it like to imagine the other side? What is it like to be the woman married to that man? And just kind of, I got to transform in all sorts of ways. Vocally, she has a really specific sound. I found it particularly interesting to be in the belly of that beast, having had some conflict with the Murdochs myself. So it just, on every level, it felt like a story that I wanted to tell, or that needs to be being told. You know, what is the inception of Fox News? What is that network? What is the effect? There's no way there's no Donald Trump without Fox. You know, how did that begin? So I felt like, as a story, it's what we should be looking at. And also in a Me Too moment, you know, examining a predator in that way. And what is it to be married to somebody like that? You know, it was an interesting space. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, you've said in the past that there wasn't a lot of material to help you prepare for Beth Ailes, other than a couple of videos and the book, obviously, by Gabriel Sherman. So that's difficult, because she's a real person, and she's, you know, people that know her and have spoken to her and lived with her. So how else can you flesh out a character that's based on a real person, but also make her your own?
You know, I leant very heavily on Gabe's book and conversations with him. Outside of that, reading, there are 2 speeches on YouTube that I probably could still memorize, because that was how I got her kind of mannerisms and sound down. And I think for me, it really always begins with a sound. I think the vocal work is a huge part of what I like to do. And a lot of imagination, a lot of watching Fox News, which was fascinating. And then conversations with the other actors and people that knew her. Obviously, she wasn't open to meeting, but a lot of the work that I tend to do on character begins internally, and it's very, very hard to articulate. I think some actors are really good at describing their process. Mine is much more intuitive. I kind of get a sense of who she is, and hopefully things blossom from there. But the scripts were fantastic. We had amazing directors, showrunners. It was my first venture into a limited. I'd done one other thing for TV, but it was a whole new world. But, you know, then you have Russell Crowe that you get to lean on and act opposite, and the guy is a champion, as we all know. So it was not, it wasn't as complicated as it might have been. I think also when you look in a mirror and you are unrecognizable to yourself, it affords you a certain amount of bravery. And I felt, people moan about prosthetics. It's a very arduous process, but it was really liberating to be masked in that way.
Look, can we talk about the makeup process? Because we hear it a lot. Oh, I was in the makeup chair for 7 hours, and you know, I was in at 3 o'clock in the morning. But I mean, there is a lot of work that goes into making you look like her. So can you talk us through that process? And was it challenging, difficult, or did you find it, you know, as you say, quite liberating?
I think once it was done, it's liberating to feel unrecognizable. The actual process it was about 4.5 hours in the morning, and then the worst part is the hour removal at the end of the day, because I'm someone who falls off a set. But you settle into the rhythm. Russell was in there with me. We had great playlists. He'd bring me homemade pies. We kind of made it. It was home. The funny thing was that as you said, you know, my call time was often 3-4 in the morning to be ready for a crew call of 8. So I never actually met the crew as myself. They only ever knew Beth, which was 5 months of becoming, you know, really close to some people who just had never. You forget in moments that you are not who you actually are. And it was quite funny at the wrap party to actually meet, for the crew to actually meet me as myself.
Yeah, I think that would be really bizarre, because then they'd be like, and you are, because like they don't realise that they haven't been talking to you.
Other people did not notice. I'd have to do the voice. They'd be like, oh my God. Yeah.
Wow. You said this earlier, and I find it so fascinating that you can look in the mirror and not really recognise who you are, because firstly the makeup is so well done, but secondly you've tried to kind of transform yourself into another person, and that's the whole point of performing her. Is that jarring? After all these years as a performer, you've obviously played lots of different people, like Tippi Hedren and so forth. Is that still something that you find difficult to kind of come to terms with when you don't recognise yourself in the mirror?
Well, I mean, I definitely don't. You've frozen. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can, yeah.
I definitely don't spend too much time looking in the mirror, but when you're in front of a mirror being transformed for 4 hours, it's a process that's kind of was initially riveting. It got very old. But I just found that the character, like no matter what headspace I was in, a lot of it was once I started to become her physically, and it was so different from myself that it did kind of automatically kick me into gear in a way that sometimes takes a little bit more focus. And but if you physically feel that different, it really does, it catapults you into the space in what I found a very useful way. And in the past, you know, yeah, you do spend time. I sort of love the departure from myself. I love that feeling of not feeling myself in moments. Those are the moments that I try to reach for, and they're very relieving when you're someone else for periods of time. It's kind of a good feeling.
Yeah, you also mentioned earlier that your voice was quite important, getting that right vocally. I noticed that the voice was quite different. You're playing an older woman. She's it's a lower voice. There's that huskiness to it. There's also, you've got the accent which you've done before and you're quite good at. So what is the process of getting your voice right? Because that's something that usually audiences aren't really taking notice of. We don't even see it. We just accept it.
Yeah, you know, this was probably the most challenging vocal work I've done, because I have, I think, quite a big voice naturally, and Beth's is smaller and it's much more contained. So you're kind of working muscles in your mouth that I would never normally use, and working on the pitch, which hers was sort of higher and it was smaller and much more nasal. Funny exercises that you have to do, like nyeh, 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 like for hours, and working with a fantastic dialect coach. I try to kind of phonetically rewrite the script when it's a very hard accent. There are all sorts of tricks, but a lot of it just happens in the ear, you know. And but with her specifically, it was muscular work. It was strange. I kind of ached at the end of the day.
Wow. You also mentioned working with Russell Crowe. He is a legend, Oscar-winning actor, and what's the highlight of working with him? Because I know he's a really generous guy to work with, and I wish he would bring me a pie, but that's a whole other story. Yeah, what's the best thing about working with him on set?
I think his commitment to getting it right. He has an incredible radar for when things are in the sweet spot and when we're off. And I kind of have the same intuition. I don't have the same courage to express it as he does. But he knows when things are singing, and he's not afraid to try anything. He's a huge presence, as you can imagine. He's just an extraordinary actor. And so I just think when you have a sparring partner that's on that kind of scale, your game is raised. You know, he is very funny but very committed. We had a really good time.
Like the recent film Bombshell, The Loudest Voice is obviously very relevant because it highlights a number of very timely issues like sexual harassment in the workplace and obviously what was going on at Fox News, the Me Too movement. And you mentioned that earlier when we first started the interview. So I'm always wondering, were you really looking forward to sinking your teeth into that, or were you even maybe slightly apprehensive about the reaction or feedback or criticism you might have received along with the cast and crew for bringing this to life?
I wasn't too worried about that. Obviously, it was inevitably going to be a polarizing thing to make. I think that's what we should be making. I have my opinions about that kind of behavior, and I do feel like that kind of rampant patriarchy has to come to an end. And shining a light on these kinds of stories, it empowers women and it enables them to potentially speak up. It's a difficult subject matter. I was not playing somebody who was sexually abused in this, so I could kind of avoid some of the minefields of talking about that. I know Naomi and Annabelle had to be kind of careful and far more aware of the dangers of what they could say and not say. But these stories are essential. You know, women have been treated appallingly by these men in extremely powerful positions, and to bring that out into an artistic forum, to open up that conversation, is a way of implementing change or initiating change that is essential. And so I'm proud of it. I don't mind. I've had enough adversity and I've had enough experience at this point in my life of managing negative opinions. I don't, as long as I know that my intentions are right. And I do believe that examining Fox is a story that we should be telling.
Yeah, I mean, it portrays this media empire that's been so disruptive and damaging as a force in American and global culture and politics. Like, that is not an over-exaggeration. And a lot of people really believe that. And if you watch Fox News for 10 minutes, it can be quite jarring to see how it's a completely different bubble that the people who work there seem to operate in. And so when you're watching it yourself, preparing for this role, did that occur to you? Were you shocked? Were you appalled? How did you feel about how Fox News has become this beast within our culture?
You know, I was more intrigued by just how persuasive it is when you spend time watching it for long enough. And obviously I would kind of oscillate between Family Watch and Fox. But if you stick with it for long enough, there's so they have so much conviction that it is compelling, and you kind of understand that there's a real method to it, and examining what goes into those decisions, calling Barack Obama Barack Hussein Obama in that moment. You know, these little kind of manipulations that have enormous ripple effects. What's scary about it is how powerful it actually is. And so I understand its effect. I just I'm very, very wary of it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I do it sometimes myself, just as an experiment. I'm going to watch this. It's completely against everything I believe in. And after a while, I did find myself understanding where it's coming from. It's like, yeah. And, you know, to give them credit. Yeah, quick. Oh, my God. Yeah, but to give them credit, I mean, it's a really effective machine. And you're portraying Beth, who is not really part of it, but of course quite complicit in Roger Ailes' rise to power and his power over the culture. And that then occurred to me. You're playing someone who is indirectly complicit because he flagrantly abused his power, and she was pretty much aware of it, right? Yeah, in this series, she's quite relatable and likable. Why do you think that is?
I wonder how much she actually knew of the sexual misconduct. I'm not sure that she was aware of it, or if she was, it was so buried that part of the discussion. I think she was in love with a very powerful man. And of course, there are perks that come with that, kind of being the wife of that man who has access to those people and those rooms. And but in terms of her being complicit in what he was doing, in terms of his kind of extracurricular abuse, I don't know that she knew that. I think they strangely had a very good relationship in many ways. I think they were very in love. She still to this day remains loyal to him, and I think it would have been wrong to make her villainous. Whatever our perceptions are, however left-wing you might kind of fall, I think ultimately, she's a woman married to a man and she loves him. They have a child. So it's more about sitting in the reality of that situation from her perspective, which is not that he's a villain. You know, he's a man that she adores. She's a God-fearing Republican, and has traits of like all of us. She's a human being and deserved that representation. But I'm glad you found her likable. Other people didn't, and I wanted her to be.
I know. Yeah. Yeah, I can't. I mean, everyone obviously this is subjective, but when I hear that people didn't like the character, I mean, whatever you think about the house is fine, but the character there was some empathy about her because when she starts to cotton on that, you know, or maybe she starts to not be so deluded about Roger and what he's doing, there was a lot of internal work you were doing behind all that aesthetic where you could just, she was actually, I don't even know, it was defeated, disappointed. What do you think? Because there are moments where you are performing this side of her where you can see that it's quite hurtful what she's actually realising that it's doing.
I think if you realise that your husband, who you adore and are devoted to, might have behaved this way towards women, I mean, obviously you'd have to be a complete robot to not have feelings. I still think she doesn't believe it, but I wanted to show that she might, and you know, to this day, she would still deny that happened. But either way, the fall from grace was so monumental that however you want to process it, like it's a pretty bad fall from a very high peak. And to even have to engage with this kind of thing as a woman, as a wife, as a mother must have been devastating. I think you needed to see those cracks, you know.
So I always remember, Sienna, that back in the day, you were always under such incessant scrutiny from the media. Like so many other actors and performers, the media just never lets up, it appears. And this series kind of shows us what it's like on the other side and how the media empires will do whatever it takes to get the story. What was it like to be able to play a role where you were kind of playing someone who's complicit in that whole empire that you were even kind of indirectly a part of back in the day?
You know, I've just found it, in a kind of meta way, I found it very interesting to be in a room with Rupert Murdoch. I've been in a room with him before, but I was somebody whose phone was hacked and was a big part of that whole phone hacking scandal in England that is ongoing. So it was more intriguing. I didn't, you know, I think if I'd been somebody who was working at Fox, that might have been more, I would have thought about it more. But I just found it kind of funny and interesting. Like I said, to be in the belly of that beast, to be in News Corp, which is a corporation that I've had much litigation with over the years. It just felt interesting. I don't know. I didn't dwell in it too much, but I did find it funny.
Yeah, I did as well. It immediately occurred to me once I figured out who you were, who was the actress playing this role. Do you agree, Sienna, that TV and streaming affords actors, particularly women, more nuanced and interesting roles? And is that why you decided to kind of move away from film and try something in the TV space?
You know, I think, in all honesty, the world has expanded. I love the experience of sitting in a dark room, having a collective experience watching a film. I love movies. That's probably where my heart lies. But the truth is that the world is changing and people are getting their content in different ways. I don't think I could ever imagine a 7-year long form thing. But But miniseries are incredible, and there are many more roles, much more interesting characters. You get time to spend with those characters, to develop them in a way that you might not on film, and people see it. You know, I did this movie that I think I'm proudest of more than anything I've ever done last year, called American Woman, and it's an independent film. It came and went. That's painful. So I like the idea of making things that people actually have an opportunity to really see. And I think that TV and these large streaming services are where that tends to happen these days.
Yeah, American Woman was amazing. And it's a shame that it's unfortunate that people have access to TV, and that's probably why it's attracting so many great people and so much great talent, particularly in this short form or limited format that has become so popular these days. So I totally understand why you would be attracted to it. My final question before we let you go is that I recall back in 2012 when you played Tippi Hedren in The Girl, it really made me notice and it reminded me of how great you've been in so many things like Layer Cake and Factory Girl, and you were nominated at the BAFTAs, the Golden Globes, and I really honestly believe that you just missed out on that Emmy nomination. It was quite heartbreaking for those of us who really loved you in that role. Take us back to that project. What was your highlight from The Girl and playing someone like Tippi Hedren?
You know, I think meeting her, spending time with her, it's not a dissimilar story, you know, however much there is no denying he's a master. Examining that kind of a story, which was his effect on her career and his abuse of her, was really intriguing. I love her as a woman. I think The Birds is a phenomenal film, as is Marnie, and to sort of look at it from another angle, to really look at who that man was and the effect of men on women's careers at that time. That felt like it's not a dissimilar space. I haven't thought about that, but she's an iconic woman. I love the world. I love the era. To reenact scenes from those iconic films was just bizarre and wonderful. I was newly pregnant when I was doing that, so I think the whole thing is kind of this blur of morning sickness and being attacked by birds. But it was a pretty good experience.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool, and it is interesting that you've kind of circled back to playing a woman in another show where it's about women being not treated properly and abused and so forth. Sienna, The Loudest Voice was really entertaining. It was really enlightening, and we thank you so much for your time and congratulations on an amazing performance as Beth Ailes.
Thank you so much. Lovely talking to you.
Now, everybody go to Gold's Derby, make your predictions, click subscribe, and don't forget to watch all of our great contender chats just like this one with Sienna.